Welcome to Success Weekly with James Tharris, a weekly dose of thought-provoking ideas and helpful tips on improving your mindset. And now, here's your host, James Tharris.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Success Weekly. My name is James Tharris and I'll be your host for today's podcast. We've been working out of this book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And if you're just tuning into this podcast for the first time, you might enjoy to go back and listen to the previous 9 podcasts in which I break down some of the ideas from each of the chapters. My overall mission with doing this podcast is to hopefully help you to instill some habits that maybe you need to develop, or some habits that maybe you never thought were important to developing. If you're trying to become more successful, you have to look at it like kind of like a recipe, right? So if you're going to bake a cake and you want to bake the world's best cake, well, where would you go to get that recipe? Well, you would obviously go to somebody who had a world famous or award-winning cake recipe, and you would start there and ask them all the ins and outs maybe. First of all, you might just follow the recipe and then you don't quite understand why one ingredient's very important, or why it's so important to have so much of it or whatever, and how that affects the flavor. And so you alter the formula a little bit, the recipe a little bit, not understanding and believing that there's any importance to doing it exactly like this. And so you experiment and you find out that, well, it didn't turn out quite as good as I had hoped it would. So let me go back to that person who wrote the recipe and find out more about why they think the way that they do, and how they came up with this particular batch of ingredients, and why they only use white and rich flour instead of some other kind of flour, and why they only use brown organic egg instead of just regular store-bought white eggs, or why they put only a smidgen of cinnamon into it instead of a whole teaspoon. It could change the outcome. And so that's what I'm kind of hoping that you look at your success the same way. It's about finding somebody who has a recipe. Or maybe finding, again, people that cook, they don't just have one source for recipes. They have multiple sources of recipes. Even in the Bible, it says that a wise man has many teachers. And so that's kind of what I want to accomplish with this podcast, is to get you to maybe consider picking up a book that, like one of the ones that I'm reading here, and figuring out what you're doing wrong in life, because I guarantee there's a few things, or what you could improve upon so that you can get even a little slightly bit better results if you're already doing fairly well. And they say that the mind is only like it works like a parachute, and it only works when it's open, right? And so you've got to remember that it's you may learn things that you've forgotten long ago, but getting reminded of these things, sometimes that's what we need to have happen in our lives, is just be reminded of something that we'd forgotten before. All right, and so that's why I'm reading this little thoughts out of the books and then giving you my personal 2 cents on what I'm reading. All right, so I'm reading from chapter 10, which is called How to Remove Emotional Scars, or How to Give Yourself an Emotional Facelift. And I'm just going to go right to the first little sentence or paragraph that I have highlighted here, and we'll talk about it. It says 3 rules for immunizing yourself against emotional hurts. And what I have highlighted here, number 1, it says be too big to feel threatened. The people who become offended the easiest have the lowest self-esteem. Again, the people who become offended the easiest have the lowest self-esteem. So are you guilty of becoming easily offended? Are you easily offended? If that does describe you in any way, shape, or form, I challenge you to grow a thicker skin and try to always think about something from the other person's perspective, and that a lot of times that can help us to not feel as threatened or offended by things that somebody says. I mean, if somebody's raised in prison, for instance, they've been to prison for the last 30 years, well, some of the things they're going to talk about and say, some of their language is probably going to be a little harder edged than the average person is. And so we can get upset and offended by the language that they use, or we can try to understand, well, in order to survive in that environment that was prison, they had to get tougher and speak tougher and carry themselves tougher. And so I understand it. I still don't like it, but it is, I understand it, so I'm less offended by it, if that makes any sense to you. So I think we need to kind of think about things from that perspective. And it might be, again, it might be something we hear somebody on television say that we're very offended by, but because what they showed you is only a clip of it, we didn't hear what that person was saying in the full context of the sentence or paragraph or whatever the subject matter they were talking about. So it kind of changed the meaning when we just isolate that one sentence or one paragraph from an entire 20-minute or 30-minute talk that person gave or whatever. So you understand what I'm getting at there. So that's what it's saying is be too big to feel threatened. It is the person who feels undeserving, doubts his own capabilities, and has a poor opinion of himself that becomes jealous at the drop of a hat. So again, if you've ever felt that applies to you, that's something you've got to get over. You've got to learn how to grow thicker skin. And when somebody's experiencing success, other successful people don't get jealous about it. They congratulate that person on their success. And, you know, it's kind of like a little bit of karma. I think what you put out there comes back to you. So if you're constantly telling other people, you know, how jealous you are of their success and how it's not fair, or you know, you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth or whatever, and we have comments and thoughts like that, well, that kind of blocks our own success. So very important principle here. Try giving affection, love, approval, acceptance, understanding to other people, and you will find them coming back to you as a sort of reflex action. Kind of what I just said there with karma coming back to you. Okay, let's see. What else did I get here? Give yourself forgiveness is a scalpel which removes emotional scars. And what I have highlighted here, it says, I can forgive, but I cannot forget, is only another way of saying I will not forgive, said Henry Ward Beecher. Forgiveness ought to be like a canceled note, torn in two and burned up so that it never can be shown against one. If you're too proud of your forgiveness or remember it too much, you are very apt to feel that the other person owes you something for forgiving him. Very powerful there, gang. You know, do you hold grudges, or are you a forgiving person? I myself, I guess that's all I really had listed there. But I myself am a very forgiving person. I've always have been, and I'm not one that likes to harbor grudges against people because it makes me feel bad. I don't like feeling bad. I don't like feeling angry. I don't like getting around somebody and feeling a negative energy towards that person. And I try to understand if this person made a mistake. Was it an actual mistake? Was it something that they did on purpose? Was there a malicious intent behind it? And I try to understand those kinds of things. And I realize I measure that against mistakes that I've made and think to myself, well, when I made that particular mistake, did I do that out of maliciousness, or did I do that was that a valid mistake? And how would I want that other person to think about me after I made an actual mistake, and it wasn't something I vindictively did or did maliciously? It was an actual mistake, and I tried to make up for that mistake. Would I want them to harbor a grudge against me? Well, of course not. So that's what I have to do for other people. Now, that doesn't mean that if someone did something malicious, I've had a lot of malicious things done to me in the past, and I've had theft and all those kind of things. I forgive the person totally and completely, but I don't hang out with them anymore. They've lost my trust. I still forgive them, but I don't bring it up. In fact, I don't bring it up because I'm not around them. But I don't hold on to the resentment that I had. I chalk it up to experience, and they taught me a valuable lesson about trusting other people, or about allowing somebody too much leeway, or about keep leaving gray area and not explaining things, or not coming to an agreement before we begin some kind of a venture. And I say, okay, I get burned in this particular instance. I'm not going to harbor a grudge against that person because they taught me a very valuable lesson. So the next time I get into a working relationship with somebody in some type of, where there's an agreement, a business relationship, for instance, then I'm armed with new information and experiences that I didn't have before, that I can now use to improve my outcomes in this next business venture. So, it's why they always say the third time's the charm, right? You do something the first time and it doesn't work out, and what do? You learn from that, and then so you try it again, and you either learn something more about what you learned, or you learn something different, and then the third try maybe you get it right. And it's that way with people. We have to learn through trial and error, sometimes by putting our foots in our mouths and saying things that that maybe somebody else doesn't like, and how are we going to know they don't like it until we say something that kind of lets us in on what their real thoughts are about that particular subject, So we have to remember that as human beings that we do it by trial and error, and that's another reason why you shouldn't hold a grudge against somebody, and especially if they're just made an honest mistake. I've seen so many times where we go out to a restaurant with a huge group of people, 20 or 30 people, and it's one or two wait staff waiting on it. And when you have that many people you're trying to hustle and bustle for, there are bound to be some mistakes made in that process. And just turning it around and putting the shoe on the other foot and thinking, well, if I were the server in this case, would I be able to handle getting 20 people's orders absolutely correct? Now, I can tell you absolutely, certainly, if out of the 20 orders, I might get 2 of them correct. That would be my own personal thought process towards that. So I give the wait staff a little extra leeway when they make a mistake when it's a large order like that. Now, if it was just me making an order by myself, or my wife and I making an order, and I clearly asked for, steak with no butter on it, and they bring steak without butter on it, I'm not going to just sit there and eat that steak with the butter on it. I'm going to send it back. But I'm not going to jump up and scream and yell at the waitress or the waiter because they got the order wrong, which I've seen so many people do, and they immediately go right to that red line and explode on people. And they don't have any way of learning to forgive people. They're short fuses, and I've got a long fuse. My fuse is very long, and it takes a lot to really get to me. But when you finally get to me, then that's when the fuse ignites the explosives, and bang, I'm all about handling my business at that time. But I can take a lot of stuff in the beginning that I can deal with and understand, and it's only after several mistakes happen that I start really getting upset with somebody and letting them know. And I don't necessarily blow up, and occasionally I'll have to blow up. That's usually our last resort. But many years ago, that used to be my first resort. My first resort used to be just to go right at them and complain, because I learned that from a very close family member that if you want to get something done, you just get in their faces and you go right to the top, and that's how you get things done. Well, sure, that works. But at what expense? Look at how much my blood had to boil, and how much adrenaline got dumped into my system, and how much I must have caused that person to have that same feeling just to get what I wanted. And now how does that person see me in their mind, and what are they saying about me once I leave the counter? And what are they saying when they see me walking in the store the next time? I don't want to have that kind of negative energy around me, so that's why I'm slow to anger. But when I get there, it's justified, and sometimes I'll let it go too far, and then finally I let it out, and at that point it's usually not as healthy because I've held things in that I shouldn't have held in. So that kind of all goes along with this in this chapter, which is all about removing emotional scars. So let me see if there's anything else I can glean from this. Let's see here. There's a ton of stuff here, but I don't have anything else highlighted. Healthy self-images do not bruise easily. The person who feels his self-worth is threatened by a slighting remark has a small, weak ego and a small amount of self-esteem. He is self-centered, self-concerned, hard to get along with, and what we call egotistic. But we do not cure a sick or weak ego by beating it down, undermining it, or making it even weaker through self-abnegation or trying to become selfless. Self-esteem is as necessary to the spirit as food is to the body. The cure for self-centeredness, self-concern, self-concern or egotism, and all of the ills that go with it is the development of a healthy, strong ego by building up self-esteem. And it goes on to talk all about that. So this is such a wonderful book. That's kind of the message for today. I really don't have anything more to add to today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed our short time together today, and hope you got a couple of little nuggets of information that can help inspire you for the rest of the day or maybe for the week. And if you did find something like that in this, please let me know in the comments below, and like it and share it with friends and family. And I will see you all next week.
That's all for this week. Tune in next week for another episode of Success Weekly. Do you have an idea you'd like James to talk about in an upcoming episode? Post your comments and be sure to share this podcast with friends.